just a little bit of introduction. I bring to the generation gap discussion the fact that I'm a baby boomer. I am the people, we are the people that are using up all the resources. We are the people who you lot are going to have to keep alive. I have grandchildren and I have my own children. So I come to this with a lot of experience in terms of what it's like to go through, and also as a filmmaker and a program maker. I started my life as a primary school teacher. I had my 2 children very, very young, in the days when we all went off and got married and had babies incredibly young, well before the feminist movement, well before any of us women had any choice about what we did or understood about that. So I had 2 children incredibly young, didn't know what to do, was pregnant when I sat my finals, much to the distress of my parents. And I kind of went into teaching, and my first experience of the 7 Up series, which I subsequently have become involved in, was as a trainee teacher. When I was doing my Cert Ed in primary school education, 7 Up was the only film that was around, and 7+7. And I'd seen it, and I thought, this is an amazing program. And when I then ended up very later on in my career at Granada, and I realized that Granada Television made the 7 Up series, I asked my boss if I could work on it. And so that's how I became involved in this incredible series. Basically, my views about the generation gap are a bit different. I'll tell you more about that later. And I think if you watch the 7 Up series, what I'm going to say today is demonstrated and illustrated by you, the audience, watching the series. The great thing about the 7 Up series is that we have barely any commentary, and people can make up their minds for themselves. And our skill as program makers is to try and depict truly and honestly everybody's lives and the things that are important in their lives without us making any comment. And it's entirely up to you, the audience, to decide what you think. I'm going to talk about the conclusions I have made, having made 6 of these films now. Basically, Bruce was 7, he went to private school, he was in the private education sector all the way through his childhood. He ended up at Oxford University. But when he was 7, one of the things he said is, I want to be a missionary, basically. He said, I want to go and teach people who live in Africa to be more or less good. In other words, within that 7-year-old, there was a very strong, serious moral and ethical values, which even at 7, he was saying, I want to go and teach people to be good. So he did. At 28, when I first met him, he was teaching in the East End of London in a comprehensive school. He was teaching maths to a class of something like 33 young men. They were 13, 14-year-olds, only one white face, everybody else. So in other words, he'd already started what he'd set out to do. But at that stage, he said to me, and his quote was, and I quote, he believed that private schools perpetuated the class system, and the whole point about 7 Up is that it was made to illustrate the social class system in Britain in 1964. He then went on, and when he found him again at 49, he'd spent a long time teaching in the comprehensive school system, had got worn out, physically, mentally, and emotionally worn out by trying to what he regarded as chip away at a stone, and he'd made no impression. He was back in the private sector, really doing almost his whole life had come a full circle. Now, it was very interesting for me, and if you look at that whole cycle, that the traditional generation gap, as we understand it, doesn't exist. If you look at all our people, and if you look at our films, and I would love you to do so if you haven't anyway, is to look at the films and see what it actually shows. What do we learn from looking at people over their lives? We've made 8 films now about these people, and what is it that stands out? And to me, what stands out is 2 things. The absolute fortitude of the human spirit, no matter what you do to them. Individual differences are absolutely vital, but in the end, what really matters to people is their families, their love for each other, and staying together or not, as the case may be. The generation gap, I mean, having looked very carefully at these films, I have concluded that I think that the generation gap as we understand it is a kind of cosmetic blip which starts about 16 or 17, and it goes on maybe till you're 21, 22, and actually it doesn't really matter. It happens in adolescence, and by the time you're in your early 20s, and this has been proved to me by my own children, you're back in the fold. Because what happens is that you do a bit of rebelling, you do a bit of non-contact, you do a bit of this and that, but ultimately, your moral and your ethical values, the really important things in your life, what you think is important, stays with you. It stays with you all through those times. And if you look at our people in 7-Up, and now 56 Up, most of them have turned out almost exactly as you'd have thought. In terms of the class system, which is the system, the gap that I think is important. I mean, I think we shouldn't worry about the generation gap. I think what we need to worry about is the gaping chasm, which is the social class system in this country. And the more you watch our films, the more you realize that it's still there. And in some ways, it's worse now than it ever was. I mean, our 7-year-olds in 1964 had wonderful opportunities. They all walked out of school into a job. They said to me, the 3 girls said to me, we could do whatever we wanted. You know, it wasn't an issue then. We came out of school, we left school at 16, and we just decided what we wanted to do, and we walked into a job, and we did it. And they've all done very, very well. One of them's a librarian, but now redundant. One of our girls is now at Queen Mary College running the PhD courses. So, you know, it's very interesting, but today, I really worry. Today, I worry that we worry about sex and drugs and rock and roll and the generation gap. That, I believe, is a political diversion. I really do. I think what's at the heart of what we should be worried about now is social class and the 20 or 25% of people in this country who are disenfranchised, who basically, they're not needed by the politicians. We don't need their vote. When you've got 70 or 75% of a middle-class population who are all doing okay, and who don't need to worry about it, why should you worry about the 20 or 25% that you don't need? Now, I would just urge you, I mean, in a way that you are people, opinion formers interested in ideas, to think very hard about what it is we're doing to today's young people. And the generation gap, I believe, doesn't really exist, except, as I said, as a cosmetic blip that we all come through. My kids were back on holiday with me by the time they were 21 and 22. When they had a house in France, they say, oh, can we come back on holiday with you, right? They stop going on holiday with you when they're 15 because they don't want anything to do with you. They come back when they want a free holiday when they're 21, 22, and 23. You know, so they're all back in the fold. They all kind of resume, but their moral values haven't changed. Their behavior might have changed. Some of their bodily functions might have changed, but actually, in that sense, they don't leave you. And whatever values you give them within your own background is what stays with them. And I think that's really important. And I don't think we should be diverted by behavior of young people, because they've always been like that, and they all come back. What's really important is what you do to the child within its environment between the ages of about 7 and 10. I mean, if you look at 7-Up, you will see that most of the kids' personality and behavior traits are all there by 7. Some of them change their ideas, but the shy kids are still very shy, the noisy ones are still noisy, the confident ones are still confident, the brash ones are still brash. And, you know, I think in a way that's where we've got to concentrate our efforts. And, you know, the education system, preschool education, nursery school education, and trying to do something about this incredible class gap we have here is what we need to concentrate on. Anyway, thank you very much.